2 hours of talking, that's a lot of talking.
Do you remember anything specific about Zelda? Do you remember?
Oh, I was in school with her.
Oh.
And then when she came back to, I've we've talked about her so much, and she's kind of like the little bankhead. You hear so much about her, we don't know whether it's true or not. But I knew I went to school with her.
Mm-hmm. What kind of a child was she?
Oh, she was beautiful and smart. We just thought she was eccentric, and just like Montgomery was full of eccentric people, we didn't notice it, the difference. When we were very surprised when people thought she was crazy, because she wasn't.
She was just unusual.
Just unusual, because she's supposed to have schizophrenia or whatever you call it. She's supposed to be schizophrenic. I never can say that word.
Schizophrenic.
Is that right?
Schizophrenic,
mm-hmm.
Yeah. And what about her other sisters? Were they sort of?
They were all smart people. Several of them, the nervous breakdowns kind of ran in the family. Miss Saire told me once that she had taken such good care of Judge Saire, that he was the only Saire that ever had a nervous breakdown. She was the cutest person in the world, Miss Saire. Zelda's mother.
What do you remember now about your father specifically? Do you remember?
About who?
Your father.
Everything.
Okay. What can you tell us about his personality? Was he the typical judge that was rather stern and businesslike?
It's awfully hard to describe your own father.
It's true.
I mean, in any other respect except being your father. But he was, you did what he told you to do, I'll tell you that. I saw a friend the other day that told me she wrote an insurance policy, and he looked at her and says, "You do that." And she said she did it. He wasn't dictatorial with anybody but young people.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember what the justices' offices were like up on the second and third floors?
They were very roomy, just plain furniture. They weren't, there was no put on about any of those judges. They just like plain furniture, and they had no privacy. That was why they got interested in the new building. The doors opened onto this hall that anybody could go through, and anybody could just knock on the door and come in. If they didn't hear you say to come in, they'd just come. And they didn't have any privacy at all. It was that way with the consultation room. They could be reading the most important case, and somebody could just get in because there was no secretary or anybody outside to help them.
Did every judge have a secretary?
No, there were 3 for them. Daddy had one, just me, $100 a month. I thought that was all the money in the world. And then the others, there were 3 judges had shared one, and the other 3. There were 2 secretaries. There was the clerk, and his assistant, and the stenographer, and the reporter. Noble C was the reporter. Mr. Lee was first. And then Mr. Riggs had an assistant. That was the whole force for about 19 years. They didn't start when they moved. They all got legal secretaries.
Well, I imagine part of the problem was they didn't have a place to put the secretaries.
Well, the volume on business grew.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's just enormous to what it used to be.
You said the offices were very plain. Were there fireplaces open?
Oh, yes. The windows open to the floor. It wasn't even in the hot summertime, it was very comfortable up there because it was ventilated so good and thick walls.
Mm-hmm.
And the consultation room the whole floor was for the judges, for officers,
mm-hmm.
and the clerk's office.
Was it warm in the wintertime? Do you remember?
They had some sort of a furnace, but they had fireplaces too in all the rooms.
Did they use the fireplaces in addition to the furnace?
All those old judges did. They loved those fireplaces. Have a little blaze.
What do you remember about getting to and from work? How did you get to work every day?
People walked in those days. Judges, most of them lived pretty near the Capitol as they could. But the cars weren't so plentiful then.
Did you ride streetcar much?
I walked. I lived right around the corner.
Oh, I see. What street did you live on?
Adam Street.
Adam Street.
Mm-hmm.
And you lived at that time with your family, with your parents?
Oh, yes. And Judge Saire lived over on Pleasant Avenue, halfway across town. He walked to work every day. A lot of them didn't have cars. Then when they started moving out, somebody would bring them to work.
Or they'd ride the streetcar, I suppose.
No, they used to have cars. The streetcars, I don't remember any of them riding streetcars. We rode the streetcars home from town.
Well, what did you do at lunchtime? Did you walk home for lunch?
Sure.
And then walk back?
You watch that now. The judges all took naps at lunchtime. They led a very little quiet life, luxurious.
Is that why most of the offices probably had one of those little fainting couches?
Yes, one judge had that couch. Judge Bolden had it. People used to kid him about it. Now, maybe he naps. I don't know about his going home. He may have taken a nap up there. But he had an apartment on Perry Street. And several of the judges, 3 of them judges lived on the same block on Perry Street. But some of them rode and some of them walked. But we were great walkers in those days.
How was the building well taken care of at that time as far as cleanliness? And
well, we thought so. We had murderers working up there from Kilby. We didn't have any thieves. But we were always, they were prisoners. They came and brought them in the morning, took them back to the prison in the afternoon. And we were crazy about them.
Why did they pick murderers rather than thieves?
Because they thought did more than thieves up there stealing things. They're just a funny system. But we were told not to leave our purses and things like that. We didn't tempt them a bit. Several people would let them give them money to go pay their bills, and they didn't like that very much. Howard Thames was up there. He was what do you call maintenance man, I suppose?
Custodian.
Custodian. Wouldn't you call him that?
Right. I think so.
And they looked after the prisoners. We were devoted to them. We had one named Boris that, well, after he got out, he went down to Dothan. We used to ride down and speak to him. He was cute.
And I suppose they had families and so forth that...
Well, we didn't know their families.
Do you remember any other parts of the building? For example, were you ever in the legislative chambers?
Well, the legislature, when we went down the hall from where the judges were, we got into the lobby of the legislature. And then the House was on one side and the Senate on the other. And they had a balcony out there. And whenever we saw Judge Saire out there, we knew some judge was reading a long opinion and boring him to death. So he would be out on that porch to get away from it. Some of them were very long-winded and some of them were very short-winded.
Do you remember being in the chambers themselves? Do you remember what they looked like?
What do you talk?
The House and the Senate chamber.
Oh yes, I remember them.
What were they like?
Well, they was like that until they changed it just recently. They stayed much the same. They did make some changes when they put in air conditioning. But they were that same way for a long time.
How was the building without air conditioning? You mentioned that on the second floor it was fairly cool because of the big tall windows.
Well, I'll tell you, the court, we had the judges went off in the summer a lot of times to cool the atmosphere. My father went, he tore out every 1st of July. He took his cases with him, but he went where it was cooler. He hated the summer heat. But they were pretty comfortable, but people didn't work all day long.
Oh, I see. They only worked part of the day.
They just came and went, and they were where they could be gotten if they needed them.
Where did your father usually go in the summer?
Well, we went to North Carolina until about World War I. We started, then we went to Chaco Springs and Claremont Springs, summer resorts, and Daddy grew up going to summer resorts, and he just continued it the rest of his life. Getting away from the heat, like Florida people, you know, they all go to the mountains in the summer, if they can afford it.
Where was your daddy from, Miss Gall?
He was born in Utah, Alabama, near Utah. Boynton's Hill, Alabama. He was over there in Greene County.
He studied for the law then, of course.
He studied with some old, they used to go in the law offices.
Red law.
And that's the way, it was good experience. I've got a little great nephew that's studying law, began Wednesday, and he says the hardest thing he's ever attempted. But they got good experience working for well-known lawyers.
It probably was on-the-job training. It was probably better than they could get in a classroom. In
Well,
many
I
respects.
think so. It had its points. It taught them a lot of common sense.
You were at the Capitol from when to when?
From 1921 to about 1939 or 40, somewhere in there, about 19 years.
I'm interested in something, if I can ask you
Sure.
this. What offices were in the Capitol when you were there?
Every office in the state when we first went up there. They hadn't bought the building one. There was a small house on the Union Street right back of the Capitol where if a mad dog bit you, they had to give you the tetanus, you'd go there for it. I think that was the beginning of the health department. But the archives and history, the attorney general, the auditor, the treasurer, the secretary of state, all of them were in that building.
So all,
And it was just like a big family.
And then it began to gradually change. Do you
Well,
remember when they began to move
Oh my
out?
Lord, they started by, I think the first, I think the highway department was the first building they built, but they bought up old houses.
When did they start doing that, buying up the old houses?
I think you better ask somebody that'd be surer than I was. It's just kind of hard to remember.
Probably the 1920s.
I think it was toward the end of the 1920s and 30s. I don't remember so much of it. I think it was pretty well done before the Depression came along. But there were old houses. And what is that building? The one that's on the right of the Capitol, and then where the highway is on the left. And then there's the archives and history. I forgot when they would move the White House up there. But all the offices were up in the building proper.
Can you think of anything else?
pursue that question. As they moved all the offices in, was there any stigmatism attached to being important? If your office got moved out into a house rather than staying in the Capitol?
Was there any what?
Any stigmatism?
In other words, a hierarchy. The important people stayed in the Capitol, less important people got bounced out to other offices.
I don't think it had, the departments grew so. They just outgrew the offices in the building. So they just gradually went out.
So whoever outgrew their space in the Capitol got pushed out first.
Well, now, I think the auditors, they stayed at different, they moved at different times when they bought the different buildings. But when I was there, the auditor's office was still there, and the Secretary of State. Now, I don't know where they are now.
Well, they're all in the new State House now.
Well,
Scattered all over town.
Uh-huh. Well, the Attorney General's office, there was just one Attorney General and 2 or 3 assistants, I think. They were all small offices.
That's a real, I never thought of that.
What?
What you just pointed out, that the Capitol, to people in the 30s, was really the seat of government.
The center of everything.
It was the center of everything.
It was the center. It was still, the governor's office was still up there when I left. In 1930, I think when Dixon came in. I get it mixed up with Nixon, that horrible Nixon all the time. He came in and the merit system came in, and after that it just grew in leaps and bounds. But the games at Fisher Department, all of them were up there. The health department was there, Dr. Andrews.
Do you remember about how people dressed when they came to work at that time?
Well,
Certain etiquette of dress or dress code.
Well, they didn't dress freaky like they do now.
How did they?
Very conservatively.
Would you say they dressed up in a way?
Well, you know, some women are going to dress up wherever they're going, but most of them dressed very sensibly. Like, well, a lot of them were young, and they wore the same kind of clothes they wear to school.
And some women, I suppose, went all out with hats and gloves and.
Well, I don't know. I know my mother got perfectly furious with me because a lady didn't go downtown without a hat and gloves on. And I walking around the corner, I just stopped wearing a hat, and my mother was disgraced. She thought it was terrible. But I wasn't gonna put on a hat and walk about a half a block and take it off and stay up there all day.